I'm Ben Gonzalez, and this is TDI. On average, about 1,200 tornadoes hit the U.S. every year, and Texas certainly gets its share, and cleanup can take months. Joining us today is meteorologist Paul Ura from the National Weather Service's San Antonio area office to tell us a little bit about tornado safety and what we can learn from these storms. Hey, Paul, how are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us again.
You're welcome.
So I know we've asked you this before in the past, but is there a peak season for tornadoes in Texas?
Yeah, typically, even in the whole United States, but especially in Texas, springtime is the most active time for just all different kinds of severe weather, including the tornadoes. If you look at the pure numbers, May is typically the month where we have the most tornadoes. But even as we have seen lately, they can start as early sometimes as February and then run all the way into June, especially in Texas. But, April and May are the peak season when we talk about the number of tornadoes and when they happen.
Yeah, it certainly seems like we've had an active start to the year at least.
Yeah, especially around here in South Central Texas, especially. Very active in March. Many different kind of thunderstorms and tornadoes that formed from those storms. And then even recently into April already.
Now, are we getting better at predicting tornado? It seemed like this time around or the last couple of times here in Central Texas, TV news crews were talking about this the day before, saying, conditions look like things could happen. And sure enough, we had some powerful storms.
Right, especially the meteorology hasn't changed much over the last several decades, but the technology, the weather models that we use are getting more accurate. So yes, in particularly some of these more recent events, we can sometimes see if a tornado outbreak, could happen, days ahead of time. Of course, we don't know where the tornadoes will actually form, but a given area of Texas, like most recently, like on March 21st, start talking about tornadoes and the possibility of tornadoes days ahead of time. And then in particularly, the day of, then issuing the tornado watches several hours before the thunderstorms even form.
So it's the conditions that they don't know exactly where it's going to happen, but the conditions seem ripe for it.
Correct. I kind of think of it as ingredients. The ingredients we knew were going to be around on that particular day. But then a couple of hours ahead is when we kind of start to think, where will the actual storms form? And then once we know where the storms are forming, then obviously we can kind of make a pretty good guesstimate that if the tornadoes are going to form, then that's probably where they're going to be.
Now, we read that you did some surveying after some of the recent storms, and so we thought we'd ask you about the F scale and how those are determined. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So we use a wind scale called the Enhanced Fujita Scale, and it's basically a way for us to come out, look at damage, and then try to put a wind estimate on, what kind of wind speed caused that damage. So the hard part is that when the tornadoes happen in rural areas and not a lot is hit, it's hard for us to make a determination. When a tornado happens in a city or hits a more populated area, there's a lot of things and stuff that gets damaged. So it's easier for us to maybe recreate how much wind speed was needed. So more recently, lately, especially like in March, most of the tornadoes that hit like in the Round Rock sort of area were kind of in that EF0, EF1, and then EF2 range, kind of on the lower scale of the tornadoes, but still obviously devastating enough where it goes through a neighborhood.
So when you're out doing that kind of surveying work and you're looking for things like this shopping center, we saw some video of trees being uprooted and bricks taken off buildings. What kind of things are you looking for?
Right, those exact kind of things that can break. We start usually looking at trees. Not all trees are created equal. Some are very weak, and some are like the oaks that we typically have around here, are very hardwood trees. So it takes a lot of wind, sometimes 80, 90, 100 miles per hour to snap a large trunk of an oak tree. So simple clues like that we look for. When it comes to construction of buildings and homes, that's the tricky part, because not everybody builds the homes and the buildings the same. And so you really have to kind of start looking at the engineering of the building. Was it built properly? Were there any corners cut? The trees are the trees, and we do a lot of our judging of the winds on the lower end scale tornadoes, especially by trees and tree damage.
And the storm that we saw going through this particular shopping center in the Round Rock area, it was just getting started, correct?
Yeah, it was. Just down to the southwest of here is where it first laid ground, if you will, with only about 90, 80 mile per hour winds. But then as it strengthened, as it moved northeast across Round Rock, winds increased. 100, 120 miles per hour, and it pretty much peaked around then until it got into the northern part of Williamson County, where the winds even got stronger.
So your F scale can change on a storm. It's a living creature.
Exactly, and especially with a tornado, especially this tornado was on the ground for over 30 miles. It goes through cycles. It will weaken, it'll strengthen, and then go back and forth sometimes. And so, luckily for most places where it went through the city of Round Rock, it was on a lower end of the tornado scale, the EF1 and EF2 scale. Still strong and still did a lot of damage, but it could have been a lot worse.
Okay, so one of the things we really wanted to do was give people some safety tips that they can use in their own lives. So can I run through a couple of questions for you? So if I'm outside and I see a funnel cloud, or my phone goes off and says there's a warning in your area, what should I do if I can't get to a building?
Yeah, if you obviously the best thing is to get to a building. If you're caught in the middle of nowhere, and we hope that never happens, you're going to have to try to get shelter somewhere. There's not a lot of great options if there's no substantial structure where you can, because the flying debris is what will hurt people in particularly. And so, it's not a great piece of advice, but it's the only advice you kind of have is to get maybe low. If there is a ditch, if there's kind of a little bit of a low spot somewhere, to maybe drop in there, try to cover your head, because there's going to be a lot of flying debris out there. But like I said, best thing is not get in that position. If there's a tornado watch, if there's thunderstorms around, always have a place to go. Have that last resort where you can jump into a building really quick. It could be a gas station. It could be a shopping center like this, where you need to get into a place where you're protected from the flying debris.
Okay, so don't get yourself in that situation. Exactly. It's probably the best thing to do. Yeah. What about if I'm in my vehicle, in my car, I'm behind the wheel, and I see a funnel cloud across a field? Do I get out of the car? Do I stay in the car? What should I do then?
Yeah, again, it kind of depends on where you are. Middle of a city, it's hard just to kind of quickly exit and get to a building, right? Again, try not to get in that position. If there's heavy rain, if there's just thunderstorms in general, try to be at a safe place where you could, at a moment's notice, kind of get out and get to a shelter. A little bit kind of easier to maybe explain if you're out in the rural parts. County road, there's not a lot of traffic. Literally, if you see something like a tornado or funnel cloud, you could literally go the opposite direction, depending on traffic and time of day and everything else. The hard part about these recent tornadoes, rush hour traffic. You're on I-35, there's traffic already, and that's why it is just so important to have that weather awareness. Leave early from work, ask to leave early from work, get home already before the storms even form, so you're not put in that really bad position of stuck in traffic, major highway, you see a tornado, and you can't even exit the road. Right, those are our worst case scenarios. And again, luckily, we were very lucky that day that nothing, we didn't have any fatalities from the tornado itself. Okay,
so that's the out in the open, in the car. Hopefully, I'm at home, and the warning comes on the TV, or my phone starts blowing up. What's the safest thing to do at home?
Right, and this is what you can practice on even a good weather day. You need to have that shelter in your house. Best places, downstairs, away from windows, and away from exterior walls. In most homes, there may be a hallway closet. There may be a hallway half bathroom that doesn't have a window. You want to put as many walls between you and the tornado, because the walls will slow down the flying debris, even if they do penetrate an exterior wall. But the roof is typically the first thing that gets damaged in a house. So that's why you want to be downstairs.
Okay. And that's interesting about the interior, because I think people will say, well, this whole side of this house is gone, but you have several walls between them.
Typically, yeah, especially if you're in the middle. It doesn't mean to go to your family room, which is typically in the middle, because again, you don't want to be big open spaces. You want to be in cramped quarters, in that closet, in that small bathroom, because that cramped quarters will actually help protect you too. And it's not even a bad idea that if you do have a coat closet and that's where your shelter is, put on a bicycle helmet, put on something to protect your head as well.
So we talked a little bit about things you can do for your personal safety, things to think about with your family, to practice. But turning our attention to property, is there anything that homeowners and business owners can do that will help harden their structures against tornadoes, or are they just too powerful?
Right. So it kind of depends on how prepared you want to be. There are aftermarket storm shelters that you can either bury in your backyard. You can, as you're building a house, actually create a concrete, storm-proof, tornado-proof type room that maybe is a pantry or a walk-in closet. It looks like that, but it actually has concrete walls inside that to protect you from flying debris.
So something with a dual purpose can be built during construction, but always during construction is the best time to do some of these.
Exactly, because that's easier. You can actually reinforce walls, how the walls are attached to the foundation, how the Roof is attached to the house. All of that can be done as you build the house. A little bit harder once the house has been built. But if the house has already been built, you're not too sure how your house was built. You can do things even like trying to reinforce and get a better garage door. One of the weakest points of your house are the entry points, the windows, the garage door, the door itself. Once the garage door busts in with strong wind, all that wind gets into the house and it can pop the roof off very, very easily. So even if you just go a little bit extra, get a better garage door to keep that wind out of the house, that can actually save your house from having a lot of damage, maybe just a little bit of damage during a tornado, instead of being devastated and maybe having to take the whole house down.
So it sounds very similar to what we tell people along the coasts when they're trying to harden their homes there about the entranceways, the shutters, the garage door. But like I said, a lot of this has to be done ahead of time. Nothing we can do in the short term, right?
Correct. Yeah, because it's very similar. The wind is the problem, right? So just like a hurricane, tornado, same thing. Well, on the coast, you have days to prepare. You can board up the windows. You can reinforce things. Tornado, you may have a couple of minutes at best. But again, season-wise, severe weather season, you can go look at your windows, make sure that your garage door is strong, and if not, then maybe look into maybe reinforcing it or getting a better garage door, especially if you're worried about tornado damage for your house.
Okay, sounds good. So we know that there's been an effort to kind of simplify the weather alert system in the last couple of years. One more time, tell us the difference between a watch and a warning.
Yeah, we'll kind of go back to the ingredients thing. For a watch, the ingredients are there to get that type of weather event. We'll have an example, the tornado watch. That day, the tornado watch came out hours ahead of time because we knew the atmosphere was good to go. The conditions were there. The ingredients were set. Nothing had formed yet. Once we see something forming, or we get a report maybe from a storm spotter that a tornado is on the ground, or we see it imminent by radar, that's when the warning will come out. So your watch is your preparedness time. Things could get going. The warning is you need to take action now because it's an imminent threat.
So there's really only two things to be aware of, the watch and the warning.
Primarily, yes.
Okay. Well, perfect. Thanks again for doing this. We always learn so much from you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, and everybody stay safe.
Okay, excellent. Well, hopefully you'll never have to file an insurance claim because of a tornado, but certainly storms are one of the main reasons, primary reasons that we get insurance coverage, either homeowners insurance or we mentioned windstorm if you're out on the coast. So if you need to learn more about insurance, start on our website. It's tdi.texas.gov, or you can call our helpline and ask your insurance questions there, 800-252-3439. For Paul Ura, I'm Ben Gonzalez, and this is TDI.